So you're Blues captain Ryan O'Reilly, and you want a haircut that's as custom as your stick curve. At Great Clips, we save your haircut details in clip notes, so you get your signature look every time. We got you, and you got this. Great Clips, official hair salon of the NHL.
Joining us now, our Monday NHL insider from the Bob McCown podcast, the former executive producer, Hockey Night in Canada. He joins us from Cape Breton Island in the beautiful Cabot Links, Cabot Cliffs. Mr. John Shannon, how you doing, my friend?
I am great, boys. How are you?
Yeah, very well. I hope you had a lovely long weekend here, and now we're right into the NHL offseason. We've seen a couple of big trades as well, and a huge re-signing for the Vancouver Canucks. Brock Boeser, 3 years, $6.65 million per. We're asking on our Bodog poll question, will he live up to it? What did you make of this extension for Boeser?
First of all, I was pleasantly surprised at the term for the hockey club. And I think the number's reasonable. I think that this was, a situation in my mind where Brock was coming off a season that was hardly viewed as impressive. And so he's got 3 years to rebuild his own portfolio before he goes back onto the free market and get the big money.
Yeah. At
the same time, being put in a position with a team that can be going in the right direction and fit in for 3 years. I think it's a win-win, guys. I really do.
Well, as we all know, that qualifying offer at 7.5 this year and next year made things very, very difficult to even fathom an extension. So I think this is good work by all parties. I think you could argue he's probably overpaid right now at $6.65 million unless the level jumps significantly. But in year three, he maybe sold himself a little bit short at 4 and change, just under 5 that year. So there was give and take on both sides, John.
Might actually tell you how much he likes playing in Vancouver.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think that when you think about what Boeser's done for the Canucks and the lifestyle you can have playing in one of the great cities in North America, that to me is the classic win-win.
Now, of course, it also makes him more tradable. So just throwing this out there, have you heard anything on that front, whether any interested parties or whether or not the Canucks would still be open to moving him with the contract extension?
To be honest, Matt, I haven't pursued any of that. I haven't heard any of that. But I will. What I will say is, come Thursday, nothing will surprise me, and nothing in this league will surprise me as teams try to juggle, this flat cap, and trying to manage money over the summertime before October 12th and the season starts again.
Guys, what does that number mean to us? At 6.5, 6.75 million. What is that in the NHL? As we try to say whether or not it's good value. Like, to me, if he gets to 25 goals, 35 assists, which is not that big a jump from where he was. I mean, I think that's at least fair value, isn't it? Is that all he has to do to make that worthwhile for the Canucks?
I think so. I think when you look at guys like Kevin Fiala getting almost $8 million for 5 years,
right?
And Brock Boeser could, he doesn't have Fiala's speed. We know that, but he could be as prolific a goal scorer. And so then you're saying again, it goes back to numbers and term that are flexible for both people, and that to me is the most important thing. And I think that there's 31 general managers with envy that they could get a goal scorer that of Boeser's level. To sign for 3 years. I think everybody in the league would want that.
And with the trade protection too, like often that will suppress a number because you give them the player safety. Nice that there isn't. And Matt brought up the possibility, and I think it is a possibility still that he gets moved. But the fact that wasn't a pressure down on the number is still pretty tidy work.
Agreed.
And the difference, Fiala had an 85-point year before going to free agency, free agency. Boeser had a 45-point year, so that is going to be reflected in the remuneration.
And that is, Matt, that's a classic case of timing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a year ago, who had more goals? And I'm not at all knocking what Kevin Fiala is and what LA had to pay to keep him in the long term. I'm just saying that if Brock Boeser does what people think he can do, then it's going to look like a pretty good contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2 years ago, Boeser was the team MVP. He was the best Canucks player. He's got to get back to that level. He's got to stay healthy. One thing I'll say about Fiala, he carries the puck through multiple zones. He's one of the great end-to-end rush guys in the league. He's maybe a bit more modern of a player. Boeser has to watch the foot speed. He's got to be able to keep up, or at least use the hockey IQ to keep up in an ever-quickening league.
And let's also throw in the personal side for Brock. That was a tough year for Brock with his father not being well and then finally passing. So, and we still remember that opening night in St. Paul when the Canucks had his dad read the starting lineup in that first game. So you know how close they were, and you know that how difficult with COVID and all the travel issues that this would have been a really tough season for Brock Boeser. And it's just good that he's come through it. And that he's got 3 years to reprove himself with the Canucks.
Let's ask you then what this does in your mind to the JT Miller saga, because if we're to believe that Brock Boeser was signed to play for the Vancouver Canucks, and we've talked about the possibility that he isn't, but if we're going to take it at face value that this is all in the up and up and he's signed to play for the Canucks, gosh, it just puts a neon sign around JT Miller, doesn't it? That he is indeed going to be the man on the outside looking in.
Yeah, again, I think that's always been part of the plan that Rutherford and Alvin have had, is that Miller's going to be somebody that can get us a lot, whether it be on the draft floor or whether it be at some point during the summer of free agency that they can work with. But yeah, I think that's, as Jimmy said before trade deadline, we're not going to be moving big things then, because I think he wanted to wait and see. But I think the summertime is different. I think the draft is different, and I would not be surprised to see Miller go next week.
Carolina, the Rangers, Washington. We're hearing a ton about
Pittsburgh.
Eastern Conference teams. Yeah, John, who are you looking out for on a JT Miller trade?
I just have this hunch that he's going back to the Rangers, but that it's purely a hunch. Chris Drury's not afraid to do anything. He's been pretty ballsy since he took over that job. They feel they're that close to being in that Final Four. You know how good a team in the Eastern Conference has to be when you look around and see Tampa's not going to fall off that much. Florida should be in a better situation. Carolina's never going to back down. The Maple Leafs aren't going to back down. The East is going to be much more competitive than the West is. And so the Rangers are still having to improve. And it just maybe in my gut, I'd see JT Miller returning to the Rangers.
Do you have a favorite of the slow starting prospects that they have there? And they're all going to have a different value for the Rangers and how it affects any trade package. But Kako and Lafreniere and Hedl, like any of those guys, you've got a special feeling that is absolutely going to live up to draft promise?
Oh, I think Lafreniere will, Blake. I really do. I just think that, there is a patience that you have to be involved in. It's something that doesn't really seem to exist in the NHL right now when you take a first overall pick or somebody number 2 like Capo Kako. But, I still think Lafreniere has a ton to offer.
Lafreniere is untouchable, though, isn't he? I mean, I know his old agent, Castengay, is here, but, unless you're trading something bigger than JT Miller, I would have to think Lafreniere is untouchable. No?
I would think so, but, if it goes to the point of winning now. Mm-hmm. If you have, Miller gets moved. That team that acquires Miller knows that they're closer to the Stanley Cup, and what Miller can bring to that scenario. So that's and if you looked at the Rangers this year, they were in that position of God. They just need one more guy, and that will make a difference.
Since we last talked to you, John Shannon, holy head coaches here in Vancouver. We've added Mike Yeo and Jeremy Colliton over the last week. Yeo is going to join the big team's bench. Colliton taking over in Abbotsford to coach the baby Canucks, with Trent Cull moving into an assistant position. They haven't yet decided roles and responsibilities, but tell us what you know about this big coaching carousel and how it affected the Canucks, with 2 guys coming in the organization that used to be NHL head coaches.
Yeah, I do think that it's funny, the common link. I mean, Mike Yeo was in Minnesota. Bruce was in Minnesota, not necessarily at the same time. Mike Yeo was in Pittsburgh. Rutherford was in Pittsburgh, not necessarily at the same time. There's something to be said. I think there's relationships that are being fulfilled. I had heard through the season, late in the season, that it wasn't necessarily all perfect between Bruce Boudreau and Brad Shaw. So I'm not surprised that change has been made. And from the point of view of moving Jeremy Colliton into Abbotsford, I think Jeremy's now in a position where he has to reprove himself. We saw Paul Maurice go back to the American League to prove himself to get back in the NHL. I think Jeremy Colliton's now at that point in his life.
Is there a reputation for Trent Cull around the league? Are you surprised that he got the promotion? Like, do people talk about Trent Cull at all?
I think that speaks more to what Ryan Johnson brings to this organization, guys. And the voice that Ryan Johnson is in this organization now, saying there's a real belief you have to hire from within as well. And I think that there's a trust factor now, and that goes back to relationships and the role that Ryan has in everything that the Vancouver Canucks are doing, and trying to create some continuity between old regime and new regime, and I think it just makes some sense.
Was it a case of too much too soon for Jeremy Colliton? He was so awfully young going into a franchise that had come off 3 Stanley Cups, and then he gets the Olympic assignment with Claude Julien, I heard, and then has to cede back the big whistle to Claude. Was it too much too soon for Jeremy Colliton? Is this sort of the appropriate career path for him as still a very young head coach?
I suspect so. I mean, he came out of it. He came out of following Joel Quenneville. Those are big shoes to fill. Mm-hmm. It's funny how organizations at times say, okay, we're so good and we're so successful. We'll do it our way. We'll create a plan. And perhaps Stan Bowman, who thought he had made the pitch that he was going to get the best coach outside of the NHL from Europe. And it just so happened it was Jeremy Colliton. They touched bases with a lot of people over there saying, yes, Colliton is the best coach over here. But it just never seemed to work in Chicago with Colliton, whether it was a communication issue. And I think that something with the Olympic team, that when Colliton took over after Claude Julien broke his ribs in the slaying accident in pre-Olympics, but they really in the end wanted Claude to come back because I just don't think that Jeremy was the right guy for that Olympic team as well. So I think that this is a learning curve year for Colliton to try to prove to a lot of people that he can be an NHL coach again.
Before we leave the coaching stuff, are you disappointed that there wasn't any or many new faces brought in to the coaching ranks? I mean, I'm not cheering against Rick Bowness, the happy Haligonian, as Matt calls him. Few people dislike Rick, but he and others too. Montgomery back in the fold too. I mean,
Maurice.
Is it disappointing that teams can't figure out new names? And it is a coaching carousel, quite literally.
Well, but let's look at it. Lane Lambert's new as a head coach. Mm-hmm. I think you have to put Marty St. Louis and Jay Woodcroft on that list all of a sudden. So if you took 11 head coaching jobs, 3 of those guys are first-time head coaches in the National Hockey League. Now we're dealing with 8. I think there's some surprise and disappointment that a guy like Pete DeBoer gets back so quickly in Dallas. The question becomes, and this is something that in private sector, there's always succession planning, how you deal with succession planning. But at times, the desperation of wanting to win now, and can this guy put you over the top? We always call professional sports copycat leagues, Blake. And when you think that what Darryl Sutter at his age in mid-60s was able to come and do what he did for Calgary in the short term, a season and a half, every owner, not necessarily manager, but every owner is going to be looking at that and saying, I want a veteran guy. And then it becomes, well, the veteran guy's proven. We can deal with a veteran guy. Mm-hmm. And so that's what happens. And it's so I don't think it's as, I mean, if they hired 7 or 8 retreads, if you want to call them retreads, then maybe that's not really doing a very good job of trying to work towards the future. But every team feels it needs to win now. It needs to get to the playoffs. It needs those big home gates in order to recapture some of the revenue. And you have a better chance of doing that with a veteran coach than you do with a first-timer.
Lastly, Mr. Shannon, before we let you get back to fairways and greens, you said nothing would surprise you. We do expect JT Miller to be moved. Give me another Canucks item or element to be watching here in the early going of the off season.
Oh gosh, let me throw this one at you. Is that ever since the season ended, and when we always mentioned the core guys, you mentioned the core guys of with Pettersson and Hughes. And I always put Horvat in that list, and I have no reason to think that Horvat's not on the list. But I find people I've been talking to don't put Horvat on the list as much as I do, and so and I'm not suggesting I'm just wondering if there's something there that with Bo Horvat. I would be shocked to see it happen, but I wonder if you're looking for a name they're trying to create a new culture in Vancouver. Does it start with the captain?
And of course, he's due. He's eligible, I should say, for a contract extension now going into the final year of his deal, which has been a very good one for the Vancouver Canucks. And you can understand if he wants a little bit more going forward. John, lovely stuff. Thank you for this, my friend. Enjoy your time there at Cabot. We'll catch up next week.
Next week, sir.
Indeed.